then all the other little things are, other small adjustments that we might want to make to start improving, right? So in this case, and I'm not going to take you through all of the steps here, but there were a couple little things that were distracting. So this layer is kind of cleaning up this the watch, right? So he was wearing his watch, didn't really look very natural. So we went ahead and did a little bit of cloning, same exact method, using very small selected areas to define where we wanted the selection to be, and then took out the watch and cleaned that part up, creating some new skin and following that shadow line as we went through there. Then this layer here, there was this little dye bottle down here at the bottom and a little kind of strange area up here, and so those were kind of cleaned up inside of there. Layer 4 is a little patch down here at the bottom. There was some weirdness that kind of started to happen down there, so we kind of filled in that bottom edge. And then on that paint bucket, there was this weird sticker and a few other things that kind of had happened when the bottle was kind of cropping over there, and so we just kind of went in and cleaned up that part, gave it a new gradient, so it wasn't quite as distracting kind of back there. Did a little gradient filter to kind of create that shadow along the edge. And again, making a selection along this edge here will be beneficial. Let's see what this one is. So this one's a hue saturation. So if you keep an eye on the colors, it's mostly going to be muting the background, right? So notice again, over here we've got a layer mask. And so he's staying in full saturated vibrancy, but the background has now kind of come down significantly, so that it isn't quite competing for attention. It has a little bit less saturation, kind of gives it that darker mood as well. This one here is a curves adjustment. So with the curve, what I've done is just went in and started to play with brightening up some of these highlights. So with the curve, I just drug up the highlights a little bit and some of the midtones, and then using the layer mask, came back in and just painted in some of these areas to kind of brighten up some of the skin, just to give it a little bit more pop and some kind of selective coloring, so that just those highlights would kind of stand out a little bit of highlight burning. And then the next layer here is, it seemed like there wasn't, his legs were kind of just dangling down underneath his legs, underneath the broom. And so I couldn't find some good metal. And so I built this just with a few different parts. And if, from here it looks okay. There'll be a little bit of a color adjustment, so it's not quite so bright as well. What I ended up doing is, and this isn't my strong suit, but will look really quick. So what I tried to do is I created a new layer to start with. So here's the layer here. And then I made a little selection to create kind of the collar. And then I filled it with one, I made one color, my foreground color, kind of like this sort of a light highlight, and kind of painted along there, and then gave a little bit of a painting, of some highlights and shadows. So, this top part would be reflecting the kind of this greenish color in here. So I just came in and selected one of those green colors, painted a little bit of a highlight at the top and the bottom so that it would look kind of like a chrome. And then separately created kind of a, a shape using the selection tool. You could use the polygonal lasso tool, or you could create it with a pen tool. And then, again, kind of made a gradation across there, and then did a little bit of smudging. So I went in here and kind of smudged some of those values so that they would kind of go away and also kind of blend together. And then a little bit of a layer mask to control where the area is, so it looks like it goes below or kind of behind his leg, and then also so he has a few pegs to kind of stand on. And then the color correction is here. This is just another curve. And again, kind of darkening it so it's not quite so bright, obviously, giving it a little more contrast so that those highlights and shadows kind of wrap around. And once we zoom out, it doesn't look, looks a little bit cleaner than when you zoom in there. But again, that's making something out of nothing isn't really my strong suit. The next layer here is, so decided, to maybe help give it a little bit more motion and movement to it. Maybe having a little smoke trail might be helpful, like he's zooming out of there. So I started with two parts. So the first part was smoke. So for this, I just simply went and grabbed a brush. So there's lots of free downloadable brushes. We did this before in some of our other tutorials. And so I went and found a smoke brush and then simply stamped the brush on. So if I was to make a new layer here, the way that it kind of works to start with, if I have this new layer, then if I grab the brush tool, one of my brushes will be smoke. And so if I scroll through here, let's see if I can find one. And I don't remember which one I used. Let's just say it was this. That's fine. Now, usually they're really big. So I'm just going to do, the bracket keys and make it a little bit smaller. So let's just back this down a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller. So we've got white as our foreground color. Here is our smoke. And so if we click, it just creates a puff of smoke. So that's what the brush does. And then obviously it's not in the right position. So if you just do a Command T, that will then transform the smoke. And then we can rotate it around. Figure out what the right angle is for it, and get it in place, that sort of a thing. So that's how that part was created, and how and then once we've got the smoke in place, then then it's going to be a matter of just again adding a layer mask. So I'll turn off this old one so we can see it. Oops, here's the other smoke. Okay, smoke. So if that's our new smoke, then we would need a layer mask to go along with that. And then as we layer mask, we're going to need to switch back to a normal brush. So we're going to need just a nice soft brush. And wherever we paint, again with black, so if we hit X, then it's going to then, hide that smoke from that area. Right, so here's our, zoom in just a little bit so we can see where the actual smoke is. And then again, if we need to bring it back, because it's a layer mask, we can just hit X. We can start to bring back in, the smoke around this area. Let's little parts of it. And some of these areas we may want there to be, some amount of the smoke covering the tail part of the broom. So we may want to take our opacity, maybe bring it to like, 40 or 50%. And then as we're painting with white, because white will reveal, we can, bring some of the smoke through there so we can see through, parts of that, as it's coming through, right? So that's the basic idea of how the smoke worked. It was a slightly different shape with the other one when I did it yesterday. Oops, there's the smoke. So then the other thing that I added, which you can see underneath the smoke, these are just kind of like sparks and fire, as if it's kind of exploding from in there. Those were done with a different brush, so there's some other brushes that you could experiment with. I think I went and found one that was called Sparks. And so, some of these different brushes here, they're going to have little, kind of explosion patterns and things like that. And you may want to just vary the color and, create those. Just to give it a little more. Oops, let's get rid of this layer now. So we'll go ahead and remove this layer. Delete. All right. Yes. All right. So long layer. There we go. Yes. All right, so there's that part. And then I think there's just a couple last things. So another part was another color change. So this color change was to make the smoke a little bit more of like a green smoke, since he's representing Slytherin here. Figured that maybe he would be making green smoke as opposed to white smoke. And so with the hue saturation, in this case, it was mostly going into the saturation, bringing it down a little bit, shifting the hue, darkening a little bit, so that then brought down the overall value. The smoke was much more of a white smoke, so by bringing that down and making it a little bit more green, allowed some of that to show up. With the saturation, it was a lot more vibrant when we shifted the color, so then that kind of brought it down just a little bit in that hue. And then the next layer that was added was a small vignette. So that's just to kind of focus the attention a little bit more on the subject, bring our eyes away from the edges here. And then one last color shift. So this one, again, was a solid color. So we did this the other day with the multiple exposures. So created a solid color and then put it into the blending mode of exclusion. And it was kind of a dark blue, and so it's giving us kind of these greens in the hue. So you can see it's kind of this really dark kind of blue, and so it's giving us a little bit of a green cast, again, to make it a little bit darker and give us a little bit more of a feeling of maybe nighttime, but have a little more of a Slytherin feeling. And then the last thing that we needed was something for him to be chasing. So of course he's a seeker, so he's looking for the golden snitch. And so I just went into Google really quick. I just typed in golden snitch. I went to tools and set my settings to labeled for reuse with modification, and I just grabbed this one here. And then in that case, the first one is here. And then I made a second copy of it as well. So let's see which is. So with the second copy, I made a motion blur. So when I cut it out, I went through, and I think I even just used the quick selection tool, just made a quick selection of it. And I brought, in this case, I brought down the opacity. So we can see when it's at 100%, there's our sharp one. And I wasn't too worried about the selection being great because I knew that it was going to have some motion blur and some other things. So then I duplicated the layer. So when you duplicate it, you can do Command J, and then I needed it below. So let's just go ahead and do that again. So we'll do Command J, and then I'll turn off layer 7 for now. So here's our one that we're going to make the motion blur. And so if you just go up to filter and then you choose blur and then motion blur, what that's going to do, and then you can set kind of the angle, so you can kind of move, what angle is, it's going to be flying away, so I need to kind of moving that way. And then also you can play with like the distance, is it going to blur a lot or a little bit? So if I change that distance, now it's just got a little bit of blur. If I go all the way over here, it's going to completely disappear. So you can figure out, about how much movement do you want in the object. And you're not going to be recreating the same thing, but if you're doing a similar effect. And so then if we bring number 7 up to the top, then we'll have a sharp image here with the blurry image below it, right? So you can see if we turn that on and off. And usually what I'll do is, move the solid one a little bit in front of the motion blur, so it's kind of, the area where it's moved forward. And then what I did was just bring down the opacity a little bit too, so we can kind of see a little bit more of that movement kind of coming through there, giving him something to chase. So again, that was the basic idea. You can kind of see lots of layer masks, right? We used lots of layer masks all the way along to create the image for us. But again, the basis of it was starting with that idea of just using the layer mask to simply create the levitation, so that if we start off with the background and things that we want, we're going to be able to easily make it look as though it is naturally in that environment. Okay, so have fun. If you need to rewind or if you have further questions, obviously you can come over and just ask me. I'd be happy to demonstrate on your machine or walk you through it as you're ready to go. But Those other steps will help take it from this, which, it's a levitation, it's working, to something that maybe has a little bit more magic and a little bit more mood and is a little more expressive of the total concept. All right, have fun.